Hello, welcome to another episode of The Revealing. Once again, I'm your host, Pavarotti. And as a disclaimer, this is an opinion channel. These are my opinions. I'm not here to slander anyone. And with that being said, on this episode, I want to discuss what took place in that hearing on the motions. Now, I've watched the hearing. I've watched some of the speculation that some of the so-called experts and a lot of you at home have made from that hearing. And I'd like to give you my thoughts on it because I thought there was a few things that was very telling. Okay, number one, when Mr. Kohberger's attorney was expressing her case on timing for the trial to be set, she asked for a lot of time. And one of the reasons she asked for a lot of time was because of the overwhelming evidence that she was receiving from the prosecutor. Now, I'm not going to get into on this video, but those of you who have watched all of my videos know that my theories on this greatly coincide with the appointment of this particular defense attorney in this case. Now, I'm not going to go back into that on this video. I will down the road. In fact, I'll go into great detail about her history and why she's so important to my theory in this case. But for this video, I'm just going to focus on this particular hearing. So, one of the things that, as I just mentioned, she was very detailed on was the evidence she was receiving from the prosecutor and how much time it was going to take her and her very small team to go through this evidence. And the thing that she pointed out was how she was receiving all this evidence and it wasn't categorized, okay? It wasn't put in any type of order. And she also mentioned that she could not find the evidence that was really coinciding with how the law enforcement actually got to Mr. Kohberger, and that tells us a lot right there. But just so you understand, when the discovery process is in play, what the prosecutor is doing is sending the defense team every single piece of evidence in this case. All the 9,000 hours of video, the photographs, all the transcripts of people that have been interviewed, videos of people that have been interviewed, the 50 terabytes of information. That is all the evidence in this case, not just the evidence that the prosecution is going to use to try to convict Mr. Kohberger. So when she says she has to review this evidence and she cannot yet find the link to Mr. Kohberger, that's because the prosecution team, the law enforcement team, has not actually categorized the evidence as this is the evidence that's going to be used against Mr. Kohberger. They may send her 9,000 photographs, but they're not indexing which photographs the prosecution is going to use in the trial. And they do not have to do that. That is for the defense team to look at, decipher, and then pick out what they feel is useful to use, and the prosecutor's picking out what they feel is useful to use. So that is actually a pretty big deal in this. In her statement of she cannot see how the prosecution or the law enforcement was able to get to Mr. Kohberger based on the evidence that she has seen tells me a lot. Okay? And in my last video, I mentioned a few things, and I've had some people that disagreed with my assessment, and frankly, they're not very knowledgeable of the subject, because I can tell you right now, Mr. Kohberger is a methamphetamine user. And in the next video, I'm going to take a lot of the questions and comments that I've received on my videos, and I'm going to use that as an opportunity to go through and answer some of those questions and address some of the disagreements that some people have had with me. And I appreciate everyone's comments, the good ones and the ones that aren't quite as agreeable to my dissertation. But the other thing I want to discuss is very important. And when I heard it, it really shined a light on what the prosecution is going to try to do in this case. In fact, on this video, I'm going to make two predictions. And I wanted to really get that out there because I'm going to make these two predictions now. And when this trial actually takes place, a year from now or whenever it does, and these two predictions come true, for those of you that have seen this video, you're going to notice them and you're going to think back, wow, Pavarotti was right. Okay, so when the prosecution was pushing for this trial to be set during the summertime, that's because, A, he knows that the trial is going to take place at that court in Moscow, Idaho. The judge is not going to approve a change of venue. So that's why he's pushing for the summertime, and he knows that's important. One thing that he kept mentioning, though, was the fact that he needed the hotels in the area to be free so that he could house his witnesses that are coming from out of state. Now let's think about that for just a moment, because I think a lot of people overlooked that when they watched the trial. When he's talking about his out-of-state witnesses, he's obviously not talking about witnesses from Washington, because it's 7 miles away? He really wouldn't need hotel rooms to house them, would he? No, when he's talking about bringing in out-of-state witnesses, he's going to be bringing in witnesses from Pennsylvania. Now, what kind of witnesses would be material to this particular case that live in Pennsylvania? No crimes were committed there. The only people he could bring in from Pennsylvania that would be applicable to this case would be character witnesses. What the prosecution is going to do, and this is prediction number one, since their entire case is going to be based on circumstantial evidence, the only physical evidence is the manufactured DNA, okay? And he knows during the course of this trial that if the 12 jurors are focused on simply that touch DNA, the defense team is going to tear that apart. And that's not going to be a sticking point. So he really needs them to focus on all the circumstantial evidence. And he knows it's going to be very difficult for 12 jurors to believe the circumstantial evidence when it comes to this potential choir boy that is a full-time student that is very clean-cut and works real hard, and he's just a all-around good guy with no criminal history, but they're expected to believe all this circumstantial evidence to convict him. That would be a hard thing for the prosecution to pull off. So the prosecution has to attack the actual person himself, Mr. Kohberger. Okay? They have to paint a picture of somebody that is less than the average citizen. So they're going to focus on a smear campaign on him. And what is the number one way you can demean someone's character? In this day and age, it's calling them a drug user. When he brings in the witnesses from Pennsylvania, you can bet those witnesses are going to be there to testify upon Mr. Kohberger's prior drug use. They're going to paint the picture of someone who used heroin in his past. And then I can assure you they've uncovered evidence of his methamphetamine use while he's at the University of Washington. And they're going to pull that out as well. And they're going to characterize Mr. Kohberger as a drug addict. And everybody knows that once somebody is characterized as a drug addict, well, then anything becomes believable at that point. That's going to take their focus away from the lack of evidence, and that is going to really substantiate circumstantial evidence in this case. That's prediction number one. Now, prediction number two, and you watch when this happens. Well, let me back up just a minute to put this in perspective for you. Mr. Kohberger currently is in jail. A lot of the people, the news media, when they talk about Mr. Kohberger, they say he's in prison, but he's not in prison, he's in jail. Okay, you're in the county jail while you're awaiting trial. Now, in the county jail, and go watch a few episodes of 60 Days In, and it'll kind of paint the picture. Except the 60 Days In shows typically will focus in on the misdemeanor pods. Mr. Kohberger's in the felony pod with the big guys. Okay, but he's not in a little cell all by himself. He's in a pod with many other offenders that are either waiting on their trials to be convicted or found innocent, or some that have been found guilty and they've been sentenced, but they're still in the county jail waiting for beds to open up at the prison. So he's in there with many individuals. In fact, one of the things that has been apparent to me is Mr. Kohberger, when he shows up to trial, he never has black eyes, knots on his head, any kind of damage. Now, somebody that is unalived 4 college students and potentially is a Ted Bundy character in that felony pod, in that county jail for so long, it's very shocking to me that nobody's taken a shot at him. Okay, well, he's not under protective custody no matter what anybody says. He's in that pod. He's around the other jailhouse people. And if they wanted to take a shot at him, they most certainly will have plenty of opportunity to do it. It's my assumption that Mr. Kohberger can handle himself. If somebody has taken a shot at him, he took care of them quick, and they're not going to do it again. It's also my assumption that Mr. Kohberger is very smart. Currently in jail, he is not on any type of substances. So his head is clear, and he's thinking clearly, and he's keeping his mouth shut because he knows better. He's not talking to any inmates in that jail. He's staying away from them, keeping his mouth shut and keeping his head up, and he's looking for people to make a move on him, but he's also very aware that if he opens his mouth, it's to his detriment. So he won't do that. However, during the course of this trial, my prediction number 2 is they will miraculously find this one jailhouse inmate who somehow befriends Mr. Kohberger and gets Mr. Kohberger to admit to every aspect of this situation. And that inmate will be put on the stand during this trial to corroborate all of the evidence of the prosecution. And it will be a farce. Now, anybody knows that during a trial, once an inmate's been in the jailhouse pod he's been in there a year, he's going to be in there possibly another year, it's really easy to find one inmate that wants to make a deal to reduce his charges that will come out and lie about conversations that they've had with another inmate. So that is my second prediction. During the course of this trial, they will put an inmate on the stand to testify against Mr. Kohberger. That's standard law enforcement. It's not right, but it's going to happen. Anyway, that's my second prediction. Now, I really want to get into this defense attorney for Mr. Kohberger because that is the key to my entire theory on this, and I will do that again in a video coming shortly. But for now, those are a couple of big takeaways I had from this case. And thank you again for tuning in. If you have some questions or comments that you'd like me to address in the next video, feel free to post them. I appreciate everything that everybody has to say, whether it's agreeing with me or disagreeing. And with that being said, again, I'm Pavarotti, and I'm out.